The fog rolled in with an unnatural silence. Somewhere beyond the veil of mist, sails creaked and hulls groaned under the strain of battle. Captain Jonathan Hawke stood on the quarterdeck of HMS Valiant, his fingers clenched tight on the cold railing, as he listened for the sound of cannon fire. Nothing. Just the ocean's breath and the lingering echoes of a fight that wasn't yet finished. In that still moment, he thought not of victory, but of legacy. For the navy he served was not just a force of ships, but the very soul of England's claim to empire. It hadn't always been that way. Rewind to the late 16th century, when a small, damp island with wooden ships and fierce ambition set its sights on global dominance. England's navy was born not out of abundance, but necessity. Surrounded by stronger powers like Spain and France, England relied on cunning, speed, and strategic innovation. The first sparks of naval greatness were lit under Queen Elizabeth I. It was Sir Francis Drake, with his daring circumnavigation and brutal raids on Spanish ships, who turned piracy into patriotism. But it was the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 that truly changed everything. With fewer ships and less firepower, England used weather, superior maneuvering, and sheer will to send the mighty Armada fleeing. That victory echoed across Europe. England was no longer a minor maritime power. It was a rising storm. In the decades that followed, shipbuilding evolved from coastal defense to empire building. The Stuart monarchs poured resources into naval infrastructure, building dockyards and creating the first formal naval administration. The seas became a chessboard, and England was learning how to control every square. By the 17th century, the Royal Navy had become more than a defensive shield. It was a weapon of projection, one that delivered soldiers, settlers, and slaves to colonies thousands of miles from London. The Anglo-Dutch Wars proved just how fiercely England would fight to dominate trade routes. Control of the seas meant control of wealth, and control of wealth meant power. And with power came enemies. When France under Louis XIV sought to expand its influence, England responded with a navy that was faster, more organized, and increasingly professional. Naval officers were no longer pirates with permission. They were trained, tested, and bound by a code of honor and duty to the crown. Battles were fought not just for land, but for supremacy over saltwater lanes that stretched from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. Back on the Valiant, Captain Hawke spotted movement in the mist. The Spanish frigate hadn't fled. It had circled around, a maneuver few would have expected. But Hawke knew his navy wasn't built to retreat. It was built to endure. With a shout, he ordered the guns run out. Smoke and flame erupted from the starboard side. The Royal Navy had entered a new age, one of steam, steel, and empire, but the blood that flowed through it remained the same. Resolve. As the 18th century unfolded, Britain's navy wasn't just a military force. It was the iron spine of the British Empire. The wind howled across the deck of HMS Victory, yet the man standing beneath its towering masts remained unmoved. Admiral Horatio Nelson was a man whose name would soon become immortal, but on the eve of the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, he was only focused on one thing: stopping Napoleon's dream of invading Britain. The Royal Navy, after years of preparation, reform, and bloodshed, was about to assert its dominance in a way no other navy in history ever had. Yet what made that dominance possible wasn't only its warships. It was the centuries-long tradition of discipline, innovation, and strategy that had become England's most powerful weapon. Nelson's triumph at Trafalgar shattered the combined French and Spanish fleets. Though he fell during the battle, his legacy became a symbol of everything the Royal Navy stood for: bravery, control of the seas, and unmatched precision. His dying words, "Thank God I have done my duty," echoed far beyond the wooden planks of victory. They resonated across oceans and continents. After Trafalgar, Britain no longer needed to fight for naval superiority. It had already claimed it. and it would hold it for the next 100 years. In the 19th century, the Royal Navy became the lifeline of an empire on which the sun never set. Britain's colonies, stretching from India to the Caribbean to Africa, relied on protection, supply routes, and command structures maintained by the Navy. It wasn't just battleships that secured the empire. It was merchant convoys, armed sloops, and imperial patrols that carried British influence into every port and harbor across the globe. The phrase, "Britannia rules the waves," wasn't just patriotic flair. It was geopolitical truth. What separated England's navy from its rivals wasn't only firepower, it was its infrastructure. Dockyards at Portsmouth, Chatham, and Devonport could outfit, repair, and launch ships with an efficiency no other nation could match. Naval academies turned boys into officers, instilling in them not only maritime skills, but a rigid sense of honor and loyalty. Technological innovation was constant. Sextants, steam engines, iron hulls. The HMS Warrior, launched in 1860, was the first armor-plated, iron-hulled warship powered by both sail and steam. It rendered every ship that came before it obsolete and marked the dawn of a new naval era. Rival nations tried to keep up. By the late 19th century, Germany and the United States had begun building powerful fleets of their own. But the Royal Navy stayed ahead. Its strategy was simple and aggressive: always be at least as powerful as the next two largest navies combined. This philosophy, known as the two-power standard, made Britain's navy an unchallengeable force. When HMS Dreadnought was launched in 1906, it revolutionized battleship design, so much so that every warship before it was instantly outdated. The word dreadnought itself became shorthand for power, for fearlessness, and for England's ongoing mastery of the sea. But no supremacy lasts forever. As the 20th century dawned, new threats emerged, not just from rival fleets but from the changing nature of warfare. World War I tested the Royal Navy like never before. Submarines made traditional sea dominance more difficult, and the once vital battleships found themselves increasingly vulnerable. Still, England's blockade of Germany during the war proved devastatingly effective, choking off supplies and contributing to the Central Powers' eventual defeat. The Royal Navy didn't just fight battles, it shaped strategy and outcomes. Between the wars, the Navy adapted. New technologies, aircraft carriers, and sonar detection systems were developed, but it was during World War II that the Royal Navy showed its enduring importance. When Hitler's armies stormed across Europe, the Royal Navy was responsible for one of the most heroic evacuations in history, Operation Dynamo, the rescue at Dunkirk. Over 330,000 Allied troops were saved from annihilation thanks to warships, destroyers, and civilian boats coordinated by Naval Command. The Atlantic campaign became a brutal test of nerves and endurance. German U-boats threatened to cut off Britain's supply lines. Without food, fuel, and weapons arriving from the United States, the island nation could have fallen. But the Royal Navy's convoys, often under siege, kept moving, day after day, night after night. Their sacrifice held the line. After the war, the empire waned, but the Royal Navy endured. It fought in the Korean War, patrolled the Persian Gulf, and defended the Falkland Islands in 1982, a conflict that reminded the world that England's Navy could still strike with speed, precision, and deadly force even thousands of miles from home. Its aircraft carriers became floating cities. Its submarines, armed with nuclear weapons, formed the silent backbone of the UK's nuclear deterrence. Today, in an age of cyber warfare, satellites, and AI, some argue that navies are obsolete relics of an imperial past. But for England, the Royal Navy remains a symbol of resilience, modernization, and global presence. HMS Queen Elizabeth and her sister ship, HMS Prince of Wales, are among the most advanced aircraft carriers in the world. Crewed by elite sailors, launching fifth-generation F-35 fighter jets, and integrated into NATO operations, these ships continue the legacy of oceanic command. Yet the true power of England's Navy isn't just in its hardware or history. It lies in its identity. The Royal Navy was born in storms and tested in fire. It forged a global empire, secured trade that built modern economies, and adapted to every challenge from the Spanish Armada to modern terrorism. It taught its officers to think in terms of tides and winds, to understand both maps and men, and to carry the weight of a nation on their shoulders across every wave. Even now, as the world pivots towards space and cyberspace, the waters still matter. Trade, migration, conflict, and climate change all converge at sea. And wherever those waters move, the Royal Navy remains ready, an institution not just of war, but of peacekeeping, diplomacy, and humanitarian aid. It stands as both shield and sword for a nation that once ruled the world through salt water. As dawn breaks over Portsmouth and the deck of HMS Queen Elizabeth gleams in the early light, another captain watches the sea, not for glory, but for duty. Because long after empires fall, it is the oceans that remember. And England's navy, forged in centuries of fire and steel, sails on.